Beautiful.
Great. And then can you just give us like a heads up right before you, open the waiting room and let everyone in, so that way we, yeah,
We don't look
no
crazy,
one,
for sure.
yeah, no one to mute, stop talking, all that good stuff.
You got it. And if any of you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to use that chat function. I'll have it up at all times so I can help you guys on site.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, good luck. I'm going to step away for 2 seconds just to use the bathroom real quick, and I'll be right back, and then we'll get the thing going.
Perfect. Thanks, Christina.
Thanks again.
Been working on this lighting here for the last 10 minutes.
Yeah, you have a different setup than usual, Justin.
I know my laptop broke. I'm in this little New York City den.
Oh no.
Alrighty, so we're about 60 seconds out, so I'm gonna go ahead and open the room in about 30 seconds. And Bridget, I'll just let you drive, and then when you pass the mic, I'll pass it right back to you.
Perfect. That all sounds good.
All right, we are good to go, guys. Good luck.
All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to give folks about a minute or two to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started. But in the meantime, we'd love to hear where everyone's joining from. Go ahead and go into the chat, type what institution you're from, where you're joining us from today. I always love seeing where folks are coming from. Yes, Coursedog University, got to represent. Anyone else? Where is everyone else joining us from today? Northern Arizona, wonderful, beautiful place in the country. My parents actually live not too far from there. Oh, some more Arizona, Connecticut State, very nice. Columbus, Ohio, another New York. Lots of good geographic diversity in here. All right, well, we'll wait about another minute. Pomona College, I'm actually a Claremont College's alum myself. Love to see that. Maryland, Iowa, very cool. All right, well, it looks like we have a good number of folks with us right now. So I'm going to pass it over to Christina and let her get all of the tech information out of the way so that way we can get rolling with the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bridget. And as she said, welcome and everybody. We're so excited that you guys are joining us today. I'm just going to be covering a few technical details in case you haven't joined an AACRAO webinar in the past. We do use Zoom webinar, which is really similar to Zoom meeting, except for that your cameras and mics are automatically disabled by default. So to interact with each other or presenters, you can definitely use that chat function that a lot of folks have been using to show us where they're from, but you can also use our Q&A, which is at the very bottom of your screen. If you want to ask questions, we do ask that you use our Q&A so it doesn't get lost in the chat, which is so common. And also with the chat function, we want to be sure that you're sending it out to everyone or you're sending it to host and panelist with intention. So just make sure that you're making that decision using the two, either clicking everyone or clicking a specific person or the hosts and panelists. And then for questions, we are going to be holding questions till the end. They have communicated, or Coursedog, excuse me, has communicated that there is a time at the end for questions. So I will pass the mic back to you, Bridget. Thanks, guys.
All right, great, Christina. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. Thanks so much again, everyone, for joining today. Before we kick off, thought we could do a round of introductions, starting with Justin.
Hey folks, I'm Justin Wenig. I'm co-founder and CEO of Coursedog. Really excited to be joining today. You know, my story, 4 years ago, computer science student at Columbia University, got frustrated during class scheduling. I have, like many of you, I've had nightmares about scheduling, but I also have dreams about scheduling. And we're going to talk today about some of those. So I'll give it to you, David.
Hey everybody, David Barraclough, University Registrar here at Hawaii Pacific University, joining you today from Oahu in Honolulu, Hawaii. So thanks for the invitation, Bridget and Justin.
Awesome, thanks, David. And hi everyone, my name is Bridget Moran. I'm our content strategy lead here at Coursedog, so focusing on all things content and research. So really excited to be speaking with you all today about this topic of scheduling for equitable access. Definitely a topic that all of us here are very passionate about. So before we dive into things, want to give a quick overview of, oh, I think I actually went ahead one slide too many. There we go. Want to give a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. So we're going to begin by looking at what the research really tells us about the connection between scheduling and student success. Next, we'll look at what some of those common scheduling challenges are that many institutions face and how students are impacted by these challenges. Specifically, we'll look at how some of our most underserved students on campus are impacted by scheduling that doesn't meet their needs. And then finally, we'll talk about, what are some of those practices to ensure that students have equitable access to the courses they need. We'll go through how to solicit student feedback, using data to inform your schedule, and what role technology plays in all of this. And like Christina mentioned, we will leave some time for questions at the end. Of course, if you have questions as they come up throughout the presentation, feel free to type those into the chat or Q&A function, and then we'll get to those at the end. I'll also note that we'll be doing a few polls throughout this session. We're definitely really looking forward to getting your perspective on this topic and learning about how course scheduling impacts students at your institution. So now that we've gotten all that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into things. Before this webinar, we reached out to some of you to learn about why you were interested in this topic. And we heard back from leaders from institutions of all shapes and sizes. One of the common themes that emerged from the responses we got are really that current scheduling practices aren't working for students. Whether this is not having enough courses or sections available for students or overlapping course times. Sometimes students don't even know how to find the courses they need. And this is really just a small sampling of what we heard. And we know that these problems definitely aren't unique just to all of us that are on the line right now. There's a crisis and students are feeling the effects of it. I think it's no secret to anyone here that a significant number of students aren't enrolled in enough credits to finish their degree on time. The first 15 to Finish campaign launched 10 years ago with the aim of encouraging students to enroll in 15 credits in their first semester to stay on track for on-time completion. While I think it may seem obvious to many of us that students need to take 15 credits a term to finish on time, many students aren't actually aware of this. 15 to Finish campaigns across the country have shown strong results, but we know that there's still some work to be done here. The data that you can see on this slide here demonstrates just how far we still have to go. Across the board, students aren't taking enough credits to finish their programs on time. While there are some variations across institutional segments, I think we can all agree that we have our work cut out here. On the left, you can see the average credit hours taken by all students in their first year, and it really paints an alarming picture. However, on the right, it's even more concerning if you look at the number of credit hours taken by Pell Grant students in their first year. If you look at the comparisons at four-year institutions, excluding those research universities, 31% of all students take 30 credits in their first year, while just 26% of Pell Grant students at those same institutions take 30 credits in their first year. The disparity is actually even greater at four-year institutions with that highest research designation. At those institutions, 45% of all students take 30 credits in their first year, compared to just 36% of their Pell Grant peers. I think this is concerning for a number of reasons, but first and foremost, we have to look at, what is the impact of students on all of this? The data on this slide shows results from a study that were done within the University System of Georgia. The data shows the percentage of students at state universities in Georgia that graduated within 6 years based on the number of credits taken in their first semester. The numbers are pretty startling if you look at them. While 54% of students that took 15 or more credits in their first semester graduated within 6 years, only 43% of their peers that took 12 to 14 credits graduated within that same time period. And then just 22% of students taking 7 to 11 credits graduated within 6 years. And we know that this trend really isn't unique to Georgia. I've read some other research studies, for example, one in Tennessee that showed that community college students that took 15 or more credits their first semester were 6.4% more likely to graduate, controlling for those other factors. The same study showed that four-year students taking 15 credits or more in their first semester were 11% more likely to graduate. So I think the question really becomes, if we know that the number of students take in their first year does have such a big impact on their ability to graduate, why aren't more students taking a full load in their first term and first year? I think really with all of the other problems we're tackling in higher ed, we know that there isn't just one cause to this problem. Many students may not even know what counts as a full load. While students need to take 15 credits a semester to graduate on time, federal financial aid only requires students to take 12 credits a semester to maintain that full-time status. This may mislead some students into thinking that 12 credit semester will get them where they need to be. We also know that external factors really play a lot into a student's decision to take a full load or not. Family, friends, or maybe even some cases, even advisors will counsel students to quote unquote ease into their college career. Yet we know that studies show that students that take 15 credits in their first semester don't fare any worse than their counterparts taking fewer credits. And some studies have even shown that students are more likely to fare better and get better grades if they take a full load in their first year. We also know, of course, our students are juggling many commitments outside their studies. Our students are caregivers, employees, they have many commitments. But where we'll be focusing our time today is course accessibility. If students can't access the courses they need, they won't be able to take enough credits to stay on track for on-time completion. We actually had a chance to talk to Dr. Tristan Denley at the University System of Georgia. Him and Justin had a great conversation. And he's really one of the forefront thinkers on this subject and was involved in some of the studies that I cited on the previous slide. He told us that oftentimes students aren't able to take the classes they need because of the way that we create the schedule. And Dr. Denley certainly isn't the only person that has told us this. I really love the quote on the slide here. It's actually from one of our partners, Dr. Casey Bullock at Weber State. He noted that, it's really easy to say that students aren't following the plan, they aren't following the process, but we really have to investigate what we're doing and ask if we're making it more difficult for students to get through. And how often are we creating these roadblocks? And these are exactly the type of questions that we've been asking ourselves. How can we make it easier for students to not only access the courses, but take them at times that work for them and work for all of the other commitments that they're juggling? So I'm going to hand it over to Justin now.
Thanks, Bridget. So we're going to spend the next portion of our session discussing how scheduling practices create barriers for students. And we'll look specifically at how some of our most underserved students aren't being served by current scheduling practices. So I'm sure many of these errors laid out on this slide resonate with many of the folks on the line today. Class conflicts come up in almost every conversation I have with academic administrators about their scheduling challenges. Scheduling staff spend numerous hours coordinating the schedule they receive from multiple academic units and hand entering duplicate error-prone information into the student information system. These processes are incredibly time-intensive and anxiety-inducing. And so it's really difficult to find the time or space to audit if all the co-recs or prereqs for each academic program are scheduled at different times and being, pathways being maintained. Invariably, some of these courses slip through the cracks and are scheduled at the same time. And sometimes there's hidden course combinations that students are taking together that, Chem 101 and Bio 101 that can slip through the cracks. And once the schedule goes live, students notify administrators of the conflict, who then must either remove or cancel the conflicting courses. Students planning to take or already registered for the competing courses are left scrambling to find a new section or course that works with their schedule and will keep them on track. A couple of these scheduling errors are, perhaps less common, dual grading errors and variable unit errors, but they're ones that you've told us have an outsized impact on the students that are actually affected by them. And many of you have probably seen these once or twice. So I want to talk a little bit, if you go to the next slide, Bridget, about how inefficiencies can lengthen time to completion. So we know from talking to our partners that inefficiencies in the course scheduling process can lengthen that time to completion. But what does that look like across the sector, and what is it that your peers are saying about that? We recently partnered with University Business to conduct a survey on academic operations and how inefficiencies impact students. And from the over 220 responses we got, 65% of the respondents said that course scheduling issues either significantly or somewhat impacted students' time to completion. I found that data staggering. 65% is a lot. So where is the data? And how are course offerings misaligned with student demand? So we know that these manual scheduling errors aren't the only things that create these accessibility challenges for students. The fact is, many of our schedules aren't created with data-informed decision-making. Schedules are often created based on a term-to-term rollover, or created from scratch based on the guesses and preferences of academic departments. There's usually very little data or insights into student demand. And if there is insight into student demand, there's often a lot of pushback. I was talking with one university registrar, and they told me that even if student preferences aren't changing, oftentimes the schedule being rolled over never completely met students' needs in the first place. In their words, we roll over schedules, but we just roll over problems. David, I'd love to hear from you here. You spend a lot of time talking with students, and I'd love to hear, what are some of the most frequent scheduling problems students come to your office with?
Yeah, Justin, thanks. I guess looking at this screen, I'm sure many of the other people on the call are saying, were you listening in on our lobby, right? Are you listening to our students live and in person? Because these are the exact things that we continue to hear. Here at Hawaii Pacific University, we're an urban campus, so we are a mixed use space. And so we have classes scattered throughout downtown Honolulu. So passing time really becomes an incredible issue for us, whether it's waiting for elevators or waiting for shuttles, taking into account traffic, rush hour traffic, and bus schedules. We hear that we just don't have enough time to get between classes, and that our passing time is not appropriate for the way that we have our schedule set up. Definitely here, the 2 classes I need to graduate are always offered at the exact same time. How do I choose, and how do I stay? How do I meet the pathway you have laid out if you continually schedule these 2 classes at the same time? And one that maybe is a little bit newer for us, HPU has been traditionally a face-to-face school, but with COVID, as everybody knows, everything has changed. We now have students asking more and more for courses offered in a different modality. So yes, you are offering that course face-to-face, but I want to work and I want to take that course online. So we're hearing much more demand for different instructional modalities, and we're not always able to offer those modalities to meet those student demands.
Thanks, David. So I think I asked the question is, so in our same survey with university business, we asked about the role of data in course schedule. We know that using data to inform the course schedule, like most business practices, can help mitigate a lot of the problems students face that we highlighted on the previous slide. And the good news is that the majority of your peers are using data to some extent to inform their course scheduling process. However, almost half of institutions reported that they somewhat use data in the course scheduling process. This is somewhat puzzling. In an age of information overload, why aren't we using all of the information we have to create truly student-optimized schedules? So David, I'd love for you to weigh in here. I know that you're in the process of implementing a new class scheduling tool. So in some ways, some of these business processes are changing. But how did you use data in your course scheduling process before the implementation? And how are you thinking about using data with a software like Coursedog after the implementation?
Justin, again, you were speaking my language when you were talking about rolling forward problems, because that is exactly the type of data that HPU had used in the past, right? You have anecdotal evidence from students who raised their hand and said to the faculty members or the deans who are crafting the schedule, this didn't work for me last time. So you might have a few tweaks and adjustments, but for the most part, we were rolling term to term. And there are always good intentions to, fix things for the next time around, but we all know things get busy. It's time to launch the schedule. So it's easier to just roll what you know. And as you said, that just continues to roll the problems forward. And that's frustrating because, as you said, we have so much data at our fingertips all the time. We have pretty robust student information systems that give us up-to-the-minute data on what students are in what majors. And we couple that with some pretty good 4-year degree plans. So we should be able to anticipate demand. But I think the problem is getting that information from our various student information systems and marrying that with just the changes in enrollments and the changes that happen to our degree programs as programs change course sequencing. And then, of course, you always have new department chairs coming into play who have an idea that they want to blow things up and try things differently. So there are all these competing factors where there are different powers that be that want to make changes, but we're not actually looking at the data that we have. So my hope in moving with the scheduling software is that we can incorporate our curriculum mapping, we can incorporate our scheduling data, and we can incorporate real-time student data about where a student is at in their program and what they need next to be able to provide more of that just-in-time scheduling that I think we're all striving for.
So I think one of the things that is oftentimes missed about scheduling challenges is that the impact is not equal. While course accessibility challenges impact all students, we know they have an outsized impact on the most underserved students. So we could probably talk about this slide all day long, but I'll just give a couple of examples. I know many administrators are worried about employed students being able to have access to the courses they need while also balancing their jobs. Will these students be able to take all the courses they need either before or after they go to work? These students often can't afford to be on campus all day and have their classes spread out over 7 to 8 hours. I know when I was starting Coursedog in college, I had significant scheduling challenges even while building a company, and that was one sliver of what a lot of students face today. Other students are disproportionately impacted by scheduling errors. For example, if 2 required courses are accidentally scheduled at the same time, students are forced to choose between courses and as a result may not take a full load. This can impact students that need to maintain a certain load to qualify for financial aid. Similarly, if a course with variable units is incorrectly marked, students may find out only after they registered for the course that they actually won't receive the numbers of credits that they expected. While these errors may not happen often, when they do, and they do happen, it can have large ramifications for our underserved students. I also know this slide doesn't even cover all the various student groups that we could talk about when it comes to course access. I've talked with administrators that are concerned about access for transfer students, students that commute home on the weekends, gap year students, student athletes, incarcerated students, and the list goes on. So we want to open this up to you. We just spent some time talking about how different groups of students can be impacted by a schedule that isn't created with their needs in mind. We'd love to hear from you about which groups of students on campus you're most worried about accessing the courses they need. So if you look on your screen, there should be a poll that pops up. Please select which group of students you're most concerned about of the groups shown here. If there's another group we don't have listed here, go ahead and select other and type your answer into the chat. We'll leave this open for about 60 seconds. So feel free to take some time and think about which group of these students on your campus is it really important to be thinking about course access for? I think we got to open this poll.
The poll is actually open. We are going to leave it up for another 20 seconds, but it looks like we've got some great participation. Thank you to everybody who's engaging. It's awesome. Alrighty, so we'll wrap it up, and in just a second, I'm going to close out. If anybody has last minute submissions, and we'll go ahead and share those results as well. Awesome. Thank you again for your participation. I'm going to end the poll, and we will share those results. Justin, are you able to see those results? Yes. Awesome.
So it looks like from interpreting the data, most of you, the 34% of you are concerned about employed students, 23% concerned about low-income students, 11% students with federal financial aid, 9% students with children, and then 3% in some of the other categories. Bridget, I'll give it to you to take it from here.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I think these results, really resonate with folks a lot. We've asked this similar question with other groups of people, and I think that similarly, those employed students, students with children, low-income students, those really rise to the top of the list. So I think that there definitely needs to be some more emphasis here. And I know, David, we've talked a lot about this. I'm curious, does this resonate with, what you're seeing on your campus? I know that HPU specifically has some unique groups of students on your campus.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's no secret that Hawaii is a very expensive place to live, and so we definitely take into consideration our employed students who are often, unfortunately having to choose between, do I go to class or do I go to my job to be able to pay for class? And when we're talking about rolling schedules over and over year after year, are we constantly putting the same class that students need during working hours or traditional working hours? Um, and we also certainly have to deal with transportation here. We have 3 campuses and multiple classroom sites on military bases. So, are we scheduling things where a student has to go from our downtown campus for a lecture, take the shuttle all the way over to the other side of the island for a lab, make their way to the coast to get on the research vessel, and then get back downtown for lecture? So definitely students relying on public transportation has an impact in how we think about our scheduling. I know that you also mentioned our unique population here with active military students. That's definitely high of mind for us. We have courses that are offered on 5 to 6 military bases a year, and our military population, we have a lot of active duty students, and they are here for a semester or potentially a few years. So the stopping and starting out really causes us to think about how we're offering courses in our course carousel, because we have so many different people wanting to start different programs throughout the year. So for our 8-week, for our military students, we've actually moved to 8-week modules so that there are now 7 entry points per year for our programs, which makes scheduling a little bit more difficult, but it definitely serves those military population who need courses offered on a very different cycle. And of course, I'm reading in the chat, international students. We have a lot of students who want to come to Hawaii, who are international, who want to use this as a study abroad opportunity. And of course, we need to make sure that we're offering those classes face-to-face so that they meet their visa requirements. And so there's always the consideration of how do we balance our online versus face-to-face offerings so that we can meet the needs and give our international students a full-time course load, and our military students a full-time course load, so they can qualify for basic housing allowance. So all of these factors definitely are at play in thinking how we're going to stagger and structure our schedule semester to semester, but also throughout the day.
Definitely. It sounds like it's a balancing act, to say the least. Lots of considerations going into making the schedule. Great. Well, I know that Justin just kind of talked through some of the different, student groups that are impacted by scheduling practices, but I wanted to dive deeper into some of those specific groups, and I think they align really well with what we saw from our poll results. So first, students with children. We know that these students have time constraints due to their caretaking responsibilities, and oftentimes they need to complete their courses during school hours for their children. Institutions with large populations of students with children should consider questions such as, how far away are those local K through 12 schools from campus? What time are those schools in session? And do those schools or other local organizations offer childcare before and after school? For example, I was recently talking with one community college administrator, and she was telling me how many of their students do have children in the local schools. To accommodate this large population of students, they're actually introducing scheduling bands that allow students to take all the classes they need between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. After these classes finish up at 2 p.m., they'll then be able to go on and pick their kids up from those local schools. Employed students, I know this is another really huge population, I think rose to the top of our poll question we just asked. We know that these students have a lot of time constraints, and I think someone highlighted in the chat, sometimes these time constraints are changing. This can be difficult. I think one way to approach this, though, is looking at what types of industries these students work in, the major employers in these industries in the local communities, and their hours of operation. So for example, we know that if students commonly are working in retail and hospitality, these industries usually need more workers in the afternoons and evenings than in the morning. Next, how are students that rely on public transportation able to access their courses? I know this is something David touched on, but we need to be really careful. Do courses, say, begin before the first bus arrives? Do courses end after the last public transportation option leaves? And if a bus doesn't frequently arrive at night, do students have a safe place to wait after their course ends? But finally, on the slide here, we have low-income students. Institutions really need to think holistically about course access and timing to think about how it relates to other services that students rely on. For example, can students easily access tutoring services or technology labs before and after scheduled classes? Will cafeterias or food carts be open and near where these courses are offered? Like Justin said, we could really spend endless time talking about this. So I want to move on and discuss some of the practices that will actually help us meet some of these needs. So for the last portion of today's session, we're going to talk about how to solicit student feedback using data to inform your schedule and what role technology plays in all of this. And definitely a lot to discuss here, so let's get into it. I spent the past few months interviewing academic administrators, and in these conversations, I always asked if they had a method of collecting student feedback whenever a student came to them about a scheduling challenge. Most administrators told me that, they heard anecdotal feedback, but they didn't really have a central place for storing these student scheduling requests. However, I did speak with one institution that implemented an easy solution for collecting their student feedback. And I really love this practice because I think it's something that can be implemented fairly easily. This institution created an online shareable spreadsheet that deans, course schedulers, advisors, and student success coaches have access to. Whenever a student came to one of these individuals with a class issue or a request, they noted it in this spreadsheet for everyone to see. The deans could then view this spreadsheet and see once a critical mass of requests came in, say, a lot of students needed to take Bio 101 at 1 p.m., but there just wasn't a section available. But once they saw these documented requests, they could go in and add a course or a section to meet the student demand as capacity and resources allow. If the dean then did decide to open up a new course, they would then email the advisors and let them know about the class opening to pass along to students. This seemingly simple process had actually really big impact at this institution. Based on this simple spreadsheet that they started, they were able to open up 17 new sections as a result of this tracking. This isn't just a huge win for the students who would have otherwise been unable to take classes, but also an additional source of tuition revenue for the institution. This is just one way to track student preferences, but there are also some more proactive ways to solicit student feedback about the schedule. While institutions frequently survey students on a variety of topics, course scheduling is rarely one of those topics. However, these questions can really yield helpful insights when it comes to creating the course schedule. The areas on the left, modality, time of day of week, all of these preferences are certainly important, but I think the topics on the right side are just as important. Institutions should seek to understand how different groups of students are impacted by course access and ask demographic questions such as about enrollment status, campus that they attend, and the goals of their studies. Surveys are also a great way to get feedback about barriers to course access, both at that institutional and personal level. Are students unable to access courses because the courses they need are always full or not offered at times that work for their schedules? Or on a more personal level, are students dealing with other factors such as childcare, work, or transportation challenges that might impact how and when they're able to access the courses they need? I will caveat one thing here. I know that we do need to be wary of over-surveying our students. I think especially over the past few years during the pandemic, students have been asked to complete many, many surveys. And I know that this is something that you've been thinking about at HPU, David. Last time we spoke, you mentioned that you actually included some scheduling questions about course access in your advising survey. And this allowed you to kind of work those questions in without sending out multiple surveys. So I would love to hear, what did you learn from that survey? What are your takeaways? Any changes you're planning on making based on that information?
Yeah, Bridget, we survey our students about our advising quality pretty often, and and sometimes our advisors are unfairly pinged for scheduling issues, right? Like they're the ones that get the blame for students not being able to find the classes they need. So we embedded some questions about our schedule access in our latest round of advising surveys. And the results weren't that surprising, but the benefit of having them included in the survey was that we actually had some real hard data to show to really push to implement some of the changes that we had already made or that we wanted to make. So most of those, no surprise, revolve around trouble determining when classes will be held and how to plan ahead for things like studying abroad or even planning a semester ahead as you're working with your employer on your work schedule. You know, we as administrators typically hold the schedule pretty tight and close until we release it on the public and then expect them to almost take immediate action on scheduling. So I'm sure I'm going to hear, if I could hear the participants, I might hear a groan on this, but it allowed us to pilot full year's registration, which I know is a lot to take in and think about, but you think about extending the runway and giving students a full year view of how they can piece together a schedule. It gives them time and cuts down on anxiety to match, you know, the fall classes with their spring classes at the same time and make sure that they have that continuity of care. It gives them the time to plan ahead and maybe ask their employer or work on childcare to meet those demands months ahead of time rather than weeks or days ahead of time. One of the other things that my summer project is to actually work with the departments on their 4-year plans, because those 4-year degree plans or 2-year degree plans are usually done in isolation within the department, even though they're using courses from across the university. So I want to take a look at, are we recommending things in that first semester for this particular major that don't really make sense with how another department is recommending taking that first class in that first year? So for instance, are we having all majors take statistics in the fall semester and then overloading the number of options in the fall and providing none of those options in the spring? Or are we unintentionally creating conflicts between these majors where it's impossible to double major or major in one subject field and minor in another? So that's definitely something that survey exposed as well. One really simple win was we weren't really being transparent with how we were putting our schedule online. We used a lot of like internal secret codes in the section area to mean day and time and campus and modality. And it made sense to us as the administration side, but it didn't make sense to students. So we really shifted to using our student information system to be much more transparent about what campus this will be offered, what time, what modality, what the expectations were ahead of time, and got rid of that secret coding system, which needed to go anyway. But one of the major wins is speaking to kind of continually surveying students. We're embedding our professional advising staff within the colleges. So our professional advisors who work with students day to day are being invited to Dean's Council meetings as new courses and schedules are being proposed. So that way ahead of time, those advisors who know intimately the student conflicts that they'll face can say, wait a minute, I don't think you're realizing what this scheduling change will mean to students, or introducing this new course, what that will mean to how students are able to complete it. So we can catch those problems hopefully much earlier before they already go through curriculum committee and wind up in the catalog and are surprised when they're in the schedule. And then one final thought is we are previewing our schedule to our faculty and some students before we launch it live, because students are the ones that will find the problem. So we're using our student workers, we're using our peer mentors to take a look at the schedule and say, wait a minute, you might not have thought about this. And then we're able to save ourselves from rolling things back at the end. So yeah, if you have an opportunity to use students to preview the schedule, they're the best judges because they're the ones living it day to day.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, David. That was great. Gonna turn it over to Justin now to talk a little bit more about some of that data we can use to make the schedule student-centric.
So we always like to say, follow the data, right? And obviously data is one thing. Most of you have data, most of you said there's somewhat of a use of data. Obviously making that actionable is more challenging. And there's so much data that we can use to help us to build a schedule. We've just listed a few of those data points here. So the first is obviously course distribution throughout the day and the week. I'm sure all of you have experienced pain points here. Faculty want to teach all their classes between 10 and 2 or prime time hours, even if this is when students need to take their courses. And, I was talking with one administrator and she told me that a student working in her office told her she couldn't work on Tuesday and Thursday. And when she asked why, the student said all the classes they needed to take were only offered Tuesday and Thursday, and they were jam-packed in classes all day long. A second example is course distribution is also important in the context of program maps. For example, if a student signs up for a program with the expectation that they'll take classes at night, all of the courses need to be offered at night as they progress. They shouldn't complete 2 terms and then only find out as they attempt to register for the 3rd term that none of the classes they need are offered at night. Course and section fill rates are another important metric to take a look at. Particularly in popular GE courses or milestone courses, institutions should look to see if all the sections offered are consistently at capacity. This may be an indication that not all students are able to access these courses when they need to. And I won't go over each individual data point here, but the question listed on this slide, I think are a good starting point to see if students can indeed access all the courses they need as they progress. And we'll talk more about some of that data later as we talk about some of the solutions that we've thought about at Coursedog. But I'd love to open this up to a poll. Now that we've discussed some of the important data points institutions should use when creating the course schedule, I'd love to learn from all of you what data you use to look at and inform the course schedule and course access and equity. So we're going to start this poll. Please select all of the data points that your institution uses during the schedule process. And if we miss any key data points here, please feel free to drop them into the chat. And the poll will be open for another 60 seconds.
Awesome. Thank you, Justin. Yeah, we're going to keep the poll open for about 1.5 minutes just to encourage engagement. Thank you guys again for your participation. It's awesome. It's funny, we used to have Jeopardy music to run for the poll times. I should have had that queued up. Slacking today. Alrighty, folks, thank you guys so much for your participation. It looks like we're about 50% in terms of engagement, so I am going to keep it open just a little bit longer to ensure that folks have enough time to answer the question. Thank you, guys. Alrighty, I'm going to end the poll. Thanks again for your participation, and we'll share those results. Wow, there they are.
Awesome. So really interesting results here. Number one, far and away, course and section fill rates, right? Super important to understand, are there classes that are overfilled, right? Students may need to get more, into more of them. Underutilized, right? It's something often that folks look at as potential candidates for reduction or candidates where we may need to reconsider the offerings. Number 2 and 3, enrollment at the program and course level. 2, really, I know that many schools look at this information. 3 is actually interesting, course distribution throughout the day and the week. Interesting that only 48% of you are actively using that. I know that that's something that can be hard to report on in the SIS and to really understand what your prime time hour is and what the enrollment looks like. And then 4th, enrollment trends by course modality. And interestingly, only less than around 15% of you are looking at how these metrics affect time to completion by academic program or time to completion by student segment. Largely, I would imagine because this data is very difficult to report on using, some of the traditional tooling and spreadsheets in the SIS. Bridget, anything you want to add to this? I think this is a really interesting result.
Yeah, I think that you called out a lot of great things here, Justin. I think, like you said, it can be difficult to access that data about time to completion by academic program or student segment, but I do think that these are really important areas, especially when we're thinking about that equitable access to courses and really finding where some of our most underserved students are struggling. So I do think that this is a really great area to focus on. I know we have just a couple more slides before we get to Q&A, so I will let Justin get to those so that way we can get to all of your questions.
Totally. And I'll just call out, I think, awesome point by Donna. Many of our offerings are determined by full-time faculty preferences, not student need and space availability on campus, which is an awesome segue. And we'll get to, we'll fully discuss it in a little bit and get to Q&A, but to talk about policies, right? Policies that put students first, right? So, obviously, we have a lot of data. There can oftentimes be faculty pushback. There's institutional norms. How do we think about creating and promoting scheduling policies to ensure that certain, let's call them detrimental scheduling practices aren't even allowed in the first place? And, a couple of them that are frequently implemented are things like adherence to standard meeting patterns, making sure that we're allocating seats for high demand courses, easier said than done, implementing and advertising scheduling blocks, and creating and enforcing rules that prevent conflicts. So I know that many of you who are on this call and in the AACRAO, have had some experience with going and saying, hey, we're going to create policies and having those discussions. And David, I know implementing some of these policies is honestly easier said than done. What's your experience been, working through some of these policies, and how did you bring the rest of campus along to explain the benefits?
Yeah, I'm feeling Donna's pain as well in the chat, because it really, faculty have been in charge of their own scheduling for so long that that's a hard needle to shift. And to get people to understand that we really are here to serve the student is sometimes a little bit more challenging than it should be. But I find that mostly talking to faculty about, don't you want students to have the availability and the benefit of participating in your wonderful course that you're teaching? And by scheduling it across 3 different meeting patterns on a Monday, you're competing against, potentially 6 other classes that a student could have. So don't you want to make it easier for students to find their way to you and enjoy your course? Sometimes killing them with kindness works a little bit. But yeah, if you're not using standard meeting patterns, absolutely, that is definitely one of the most important things that needs to happen. And it is hard to get buy-in, but if you have the provost and the president fighting along with you, it's definitely make sure that you're using your resources in terms of classroom as well as you can, and getting the most return on investment for those classroom spaces. Allocating seats for high demand courses. Absolutely. We're doing this right now for our incoming first year students. I'm thinking back to how Bridget kicked off this presentation. Getting those first time students into 15 credits of meaningful coursework to kick off their college career on the best foot is so important. Yet we seem to leave registering first year students to, they'll take whatever's left over after the continuing and returning students have had their shot. That doesn't work anymore, right? We need to carve out or hide seats or protect seats for those first year students based on what they need. So that is definitely something that I would advocate doing, and definitely something that we're doing now. And then preventing conflicts, maybe one of the easiest places to start is if you use placement tests, for instance, in writing or math to place first year students. Are the courses that students can place into sequenced in a way that they're meeting at the same time, so that a student could move from this writing course to this writing course based on a placement exam without blowing up and having to redo their whole schedule? So proactively look ahead to how placement exams might impact a student's schedule. But yeah, it's always thankful to have a team that allows you to be flexible and try these new things, and then show them the data where you're seeing student success or an increase in fill rates across the university to basically get permission to keep pushing forward. But yeah, I hear you, Donna. That's always a challenge.
Thanks, David. So I'd love to talk briefly about the role of technology in scheduling. And, I'll talk a little bit about what I think technology can do and what it can't do. And then we'll open up to Q&A so that we can talk about the survey at large. We can get folks questions. But really, I see the value of integrated scheduling technology as allowing you to have, rather than the same old rollover, how do we predictively understand demand? How do we create a single source of truth for folks to create the schedule, to create transparency for requests and changes, to enforce scheduling rules and policies like prime time hours and distributions, and making sure that we're following the pathways that we wanted to set out for students? And how do we avoid those errors that we talked about, while also tracking the disparate scheduling preferences of faculty and students and more, to ultimately create our optimal section, time, room schedule all in one platform? And really, this is kind of what Coursedog is all about. So if you want to hop to the next slide, Bridget, Coursedog is, I shared my story was about 4.5 years ago. I ran into a scheduling problem as a student. Today Coursedog works with about 140 universities to really provide an integrated solution to address these challenges. Everything from predictively understanding course demand based on degree audit and historical offerings and predictive modeling, through to scheduling workflow, curriculum, and catalog workflow, all in one platform that integrates oftentimes in real time, bidirectionally, with all student information systems, Banner, Colleague, PeopleSoft, Genzabar, Anthology, et cetera, et cetera. But I really want to open it up to the group, and we've talked about so much great stuff. Bridget, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Would love to take any questions that anyone has for us or any comments. So feel free to go ahead and put those in the Q&A function, or if you would like to put that in the chat for everyone to see, that's totally fine too.
Bridget, I am seeing that Catherine asked a question. She said, how do your institutions handle courses that met 2 or 3 times each week versus just once a week?
Yeah. It's a great, go for it, Bridget.
Oh no, I was going to say, Justin, David, please step in here.
Yeah, I think Todd Firth, one of our partners at Northern Arizona University, that we just published an awesome case study with, that reduced their conflicts by about 60%, where they had hundreds of hours of time savings. One thing that NAU had done was aligning standard meeting. I wish I could give Todd the mic. He's much more eloquent than me, but aligning standard meeting patterns for 1 day a week that align with the 2 to 3 times a week, taking into account overlap and passing time, and obviously trying to push the 1 times per week to later in the day. And obviously being able to programmatically create rules that make it, not a negotiation, but something that's upfront, transparent, enforced, and if there are exception requests, goes through a workflow, can be really helpful. Yeah, great question. Sorry, go.
Oh no, you are doing a great job. I'll let you take it from here.
I'm so excited. I'm fired up. So I think, great question. The answer, so Luke asked, can you talk a little bit more about how Coursedog utilizes degree audits to predict demand of courses? So some of you have degree audits that Coursedog is able to interact with well. DegreeWorks, PeopleSoft degree audit, Colleague degree audit. If you have defined pathways, you don't need SCP plans in degree work, but if you have some defined pathways and you keep your degree audit mostly up to date, Coursedog is actually able to go tap into that information, blend it with historical information, and actually look at trends of what classes and students have taken in the past to create inferred degree maps and pathways, right? And based on that, we're actually able to predict using our sort of algorithms and machine learning. We're able to say, hey, you're offering 2 sections. You actually should be offering 3, because we think that way more students are going to, we think that more students are going to need this than you're offering. Similarly, if you have a class only, you have 10 offerings and our data says, hey, you're only going to need 5, Bio 102, there's only 5 sections in Bio 101. Why do you need 10 sections of Bio 102? We'll call that out to you and it'll be integrated into the workflow, right? We like to think about everyone has insight, everyone has data. How do we make actionable insights that are in your scheduling workflow so that they're not creating friction, right? So again, Coursedog does that, is able to do that with some of these systems. But for some of you, the challenge of creating pathways is one that is challenging for many of you. Coursedog, through our curriculum catalog, is able to help you create those pathways as well. So it's something that I'm really interested in. One of the findings from our university business survey was that more than 50% of you said that you really wanted, more than anything, predictive analytics in class scheduling. And I've always thought, when I was first an entrepreneur and creating Coursedog, and I went to investors and I explained the state of scheduling, they were like, oh yeah, scheduling thousands of sections and predicting demand, that sounds like a computer problem. But the funny thing is, it's actually, for many of us, it's not a computer problem. It's a faculty problem, and it's a how do I wrangle data problem. And we're really just trying to consolidate all those different sources to say, hey, here's an actionable insight. So that's the way we're thinking about it.
It looks like we probably have time for just one more question here. And if we don't get to any of them, we can follow up individually with folks afterwards. But Justin, it looks like there's a question here about, can you speak to the efforts that Coursedog's been making to navigate course level conflicts versus class section level conflicts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that so why don't I talk a little bit about, so what Coursedog does is we have a couple of ways of helping with conflicts. So at the section level, we allow you to create rules, right? Like, hey, biology department, don't offer all of your questions between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., right? Or hey, for those of you that are banner schools or whatever, don't have multiple primary instructors because our SIS is going to bite back if you try to do that. Or hey, let's make sure, for those of you that do room scheduling or optimization with Coursedog, when you go to do your optimization, let's not have big clumps of sections. So that's like section level rules, and Coursedog allows you to customize and build those, and et cetera, right? Course level rules like, hey, how do we make sure that Bio 101 and Bio 102 are not conflicting can be more complex, right? Some of you have relationships that are baked into your SIS around these things, and generally Coursedog has the ability, depending on the system you use, to integrate with that and enforce those rules, right? For those of you that use Coursedog for curriculum and catalog, you can actually create defined structures of, hey, here's what a program looks like. Here's what the co-requisites and prerequisites are. Let's publish the catalog and the degree map to students. And let's ultimately make sure that that gets enforced in the schedule, right? But, the challenge can be that many folks have, there's disparate data in terms of, many of you don't have up-to-date programs in your SIS. Many of you don't have up-to-date requisite information in the SIS, et cetera. And really, to me, integrated technology is about, let's have a single place where we track and have transparency in for this information and are able to create standard policies and rules. And that's really where Coursedog is focused.
Great, and I think we just launched one final poll here for folks before we log off. We won't be sharing any of the results here. Definitely just gonna keep this privately, but please just go ahead and select yes or no, and then we can get everyone on their way onto their next meeting or part of the day.
And I see, Todd, actually, that you were the one, I didn't realize you were the one that asked the course level conflict. So NAU adopted class scheduling with Coursedog. Now they're adopting some of the other solutions. Once those other solutions are implemented, then some of this stuff actually becomes more seamless. So that's your answer.
Wonderful. Well, it looks like we are just hitting the end of the hour here. So want to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I think all of us really enjoyed this discussion. If you have any questions, definitely feel free to follow up with us. Happy to answer those afterwards.
And on behalf of AACRAO, we also just want to reiterate what Bridget said. Thank you guys so much for taking the time out of your day to join us on our webinar. The slide deck will be available post-webinar. It's going to be sent by email from the Coursedog team. And if you guys have any questions for AACRAO specifically, feel free to reach out. But I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And thank you to our panelists as well. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks
We'll
so
close out
much.
in just a second here.
I'm in my shorts because it's work from home. Hope everyone else is well.
Awesome, guys. Thank you guys so much. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.